The girl waved to the policeman through the window every day. One day, he decided to check her house. Hi, friends! For every person in this big world, it is usually the parents who are the closest and most loyal friends. Who, if not them, will teach us so well to understand the world around us and show us the right way? Sometimes we do not understand and do not accept it, forgetting that they are trying only for us, often to the detriment of their own interests and even health. But sometimes it can also be the case that what for most of us is considered the norm, and what we don't always pay attention to, can only be a dream that will never come true. A dream about parents and home comfort, a dream that was in the mind of one little girl named Clyn from the United States. This story began many years ago on one of the streets, perhaps the most troubled area of Kansas City, where at the beginning of the 2000s, the rule was not peace and order, but rather violence, street gangs, and brutality. It just so happened that a little girl named Clyn, along with her two brothers and her mother, were unlucky enough to live in this terrible neighborhood. You cannot say that her mother was a very bad woman, but because of her life problems, she was often on the edge of a breakdown. At the same time, it happened so that she could not be home for several days, and the local social services family was considered as a dysfunctional one. 9-year-old Clyn was often left without the most basic of necessities, food. As it happened, she was the one who had to take care of two younger brothers who were starving and looked at their older sister like an angel, since her mother was never around. The only way not to die of hunger and feed her brothers was to steal. The 9-year-old girl had to commit the first crime of her life. One day, she went into a gas station store, took some food, and left without paying. Of course, the young criminal was tormented by guilt, but hunger makes you do other things too. As you would expect, the little thief was soon found out by the police. That's what changed all of her life. But first things first. Even in spite of everything that surrounded little Clyn, literally at every step, she was not discouraged and believed that one day would not only give her hope, but also turn her whole life upside down. Well, to occupy herself with something to do while waiting for a miracle, the girl tried to spend time in her own world, where there were no dirty streets and no violence. Every day she would sit by the window and just look at the world around her and the people outside the window. It just so happened that every day, by some chance, or at least that's what she thought, a man walked by her house, and sometimes even drove by. As Clyn herself later told, "I waited every day to see him. He was in a handsome uniform, and his gait and his whole appearance fascinated me. He was always looking out our window, as if he knew I would be there waiting for him. One day, I couldn't resist, and just waved to him, and how surprised I was when he smiled and waved back at me too. I remember I hid behind the window and didn't even think he noticed me." As it turned out, the very man in the handsome uniform outside the window was a policeman named Jeff. After the first incident of the theft of little Clyn, he had become aware of it. He had one goal in mind: to keep an eye on the family home. Jeff was a patrolman who worked in the area, and after hearing the little girl's story and gathering information about the dysfunctional family, he decided that every time he spent his next tour of duty, he would be a little closer to that house to know that they were okay. From that day on, their daily greeting became a ritual, and Clyn didn't even know the policeman's name, but every day they continued to say hello through the window, and the girl greeted him cheerfully. A few days later, there was a knock on her door. There was the same policeman standing on the doorstep, smiling and saying he just wanted to talk to her. I remember him saying to me at the time, "Hello, stranger who keeps waving at me through the window. I just want you to know, if ever you or your brothers need help, or maybe something scares you, you can always call me. Don't be afraid of anything. Every day I'll be there for you." I stood there and just stared at him with my mouth open, Clyn told later with a smile. Given the fact that her mother wasn't always around, the only family she could trust was the officer. When we were scared at home, I always told my brothers he would protect us, and it always worked. That's how the friendship between the girl and the policeman began, which would later turn her whole life upside down. One very ordinary day, still passing by the house, Jeff looked out the window and to his surprise, did not find Clyn there. He thought it was strange that she did not come out to greet him, and that made him uneasy, for he was used to seeing the little girl waving and smiling cheerfully every morning. Without thinking, he went to the door and knocked, but no one opened it for him. He tried to call out to her, but there was also silence in response. Then he cracked the thin door, and entering the house, he could not believe his eyes. Clyn was lying on the floor, and seeing her friend, she whispered that it was very hard for her to breathe. Beside her were crying two younger brothers who did not know what to do. At the same moment, the officer took the little girl in his arms and put her brothers in the back seat of the car and rushed to the hospital. As the doctors would later say, that was the only thing that saved her. Clyn was so bad that she began to lose consciousness. She was given a disappointing diagnosis of acute malnutrition. Her mother took her from the hospital, after which the policeman had a serious conversation with her, but from all appearances, he knew that nothing would come of it. So, after that day, he started visiting Clyn and her brothers, bringing them some food. This went on day after day. He was always telling me I had to be strong, telling me never to give up. Maybe he thought I was too young to understand, but I absorbed his every word like a sponge and knew I'd do what he said. He became the only father to me that I could trust. One day, that beautiful friendship story was interrupted. It was interrupted, but it didn't end. Soon after this incident, Clyn and her brothers were moved permanently out of this town by her mother, and Jeff didn't know what happened to the little Clyn and how her fate was to continue. In spite of this, he still performed his direct duties and did them well. And after 20 years, he retired to a well-deserved retirement. He only occasionally remembered that little girl who had waved to him from the window many years ago, and he kept wondering how her fate had turned out. But just as he was about to leave the service, Jennifer Jones, an investigator from Kansas City, came to him and said she had important news for him, but that he had to go to a meeting. Jeff was confused, but nevertheless complied with his colleague's request, and when he arrived at the appointed place, he did not immediately believe what was happening. In front of him stood a beautiful young girl full of strength and energy. She radiated confidence, but that was all until she saw Jeff, after which she walked up to him and embraced him. At that moment, he realized who was really standing in front of him. But what he found out a little later made the experienced policeman even cry. As it turned out, Clyn had been trying to find her savior for a long time, but because it had been 20 years since then, she didn't know his name or whether or not he was now serving. She tried to find him on social media and even combed through all the open police officer databases, but was unable to find anything. Perhaps it would have ended that way. But one day, she received an email from investigator Jennifer Jones indicating that she most likely knew who she was talking about. Jennifer is the one who arranged for them to meet. But the culmination of the whole story was yet to come. As it turned out, the girl remembered all her life the words that her guardian angel had told her. That's what she called her policeman. She remembered that he had told her never give up. She remembered that he had saved her life, which is why she had decided that the cycle of good in this world must never stop. She was so inspired by what he did that years later, she became a policeman herself in the city of Houston. And now that she knew his name, she added another reminder of why she protects the city's streets and its residents by making herself a name bracelet with his name and the words, "Real Hero." Clyn is a young mother of 2 wonderful children who now lives and enjoys life, all thanks to a stranger she was always waving through her window. The police of Kansas City shared this touching story, and soon other people began to write that Jeff did a lot of good in their lives. Even the simplest good deeds of a policeman that he did daily and considered as something ordinary happened to actually change the lives of many people for the better, and probably changed the world in general. That is how it happens that even our most basic actions or our words can change the lives of dozens of people, even if we do not realize it. Write your opinion about this amazing 20-year story. That's all. Rate the video if you liked it, and see you soon. Bye!